No, you're not crazy. The BYU football program has been pretty quiet on the transfer portal front. What is it going to take for BYU to finally break through and start to add some talent to the roster? We're to get into that on a Monday.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com today. Place your first $5 bet, and if it hits, you get $150 in bonus bets courtesy of your friends at FanDuel. Get started today at FanDuel.com. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. BYU football is working their way through the transfer portal, much like every other school out there. And as I mentioned, no, you are not crazy. BYU has been pretty quiet on the transfer portal front, but do not mistake quiet for BYU's lack of effort in the portal. I have been talking with people all weekend long, and BYU's working their way through the portal. Now, much like everything else when it comes to BYU and their recruiting, is you have to find the right fit for BYU because there's a lot of players out there. Trust me, you look at the transfer portal, I think we're well over 1,000, if not more than that at this point, have entered the transfer portal. And there's a lot of guys out there that BYU, in theory, could chase after. But once again, BYU has to find the right mix of an individual. They have to be able to fit in with what BYU requires lifestyle-wise, meaning the honor code. B, they have to deal with the academic requirements of BYU. C, they got to be a good enough football player to contribute to BYU as a Power 4 member. So it's a pretty fine line BYU kind of tries to find when it comes to transfer portal candidates. That does not mean that they aren't out there, because trust me, if you pay attention to the offers BYU has put out, you've got guys like an Andrew Gentry, who's an offensive tackle that looks like a position of absolute need for BYU. You look at a guy like Cameron Calhoun, played against BYU this past year in that rivalry game against Utah. Could he be suiting up for the blue and white the next time these two rivals get together this fall? He's a very, very talented cornerback, but there's extreme competition for a guy like him. You also got a guy, Kaeo Akana, who just visited BYU this past weekend. And obviously, as a pass rusher, the BYU needs an upgrade in terms of bringing heat off of the edge on defense. I use those three, and there's a handful more out there that BYU's chasing. And I'm just going to say this. Good things come to those who wait, because BYU is doing absolute work in the portal. Now, there's absolutely an element of how much NIL can you offer to these young men? How quickly are they going to make their decisions? Some of them out there may opt to wait a little bit. Other ones are looking to land as soon as possible. The biggest thing is BYU has to be able to understand where they stand at all times with multiple prospects. I've talked about this on the podcast in the past. When it comes to the portal, it may be the most abrupt recruiting that any coach will ever do, because quite simply, a lot of times you'll reach out to a prospect, and I've talked with enough coaches at BYU and otherwise to understand this, is essentially you make a phone call or you text a young man after you find out they're in the portal. You say, "Hi, I'm Coach so-and-so from X University. We are looking at your position and would be interested in pursuing you if you're interested in us. Are you interested?" And if they say no, on you go. It's like speed dating. It really is. And if they say yes, then you further the conversation. Maybe they come out for a visit. Then you talk particulars when it comes to NIL, what you think they could do for you in terms of what their role would be with the football program and the like. And then you move on from that. Yes, I know that BYU has not gotten a commitment of the portal quite yet, but I would imagine that there's going to be some good news coming for BYU today, tomorrow, or hopefully Wednesday at the very, very latest. So I look at this as BYU is not, like I said, do not kind of conflate the BYU is being quiet in the portal with them not trying, because they're absolutely trying. But there's every other program out there, all 134 of them now, I think, at the FBS level. All of them are trying to find talent and bring it into their program. Some have deeper pockets than others. And BYU, as we all know, has got some fairly deep-pocketed boosters. But how much of that can you earmark for one player versus trying to bring in another position of need? It's all an absolute mess, it feels like, and it's a glorious mess, because You get the right type of guys out of the portal to come into this program, and they have proven that they can have a major impact. But as Connor Pay alluded to last week, BYU went all in on the portal in 2023, and what did it yield? One of the worst seasons in recent memory, a 5-7 record. And he said that nothing really gelled that season, and he felt bad as a leader that he was unable to really kind of get BYU on the same page, speaking as a program with all the portal additions and the like. The way BYU is going about the portal, I think, is the right way for BYU to do it. And what do I mean by that? Is that BYU is not chasing every portal prospect out there. There are programs who will offer, literally, it feels like every guy that comes out, if there's a position group they're chasing, and they'll just kind of throw mud against the wall and see what sticks and see if they can find a guy that way. BYU knows that they are got to be a little more targeted than that. They've got to look at guys' backgrounds. They got to understand what they're looking for, how much they're looking for in the NIL sphere. What can they offer, speaking from the BYU side of things, to these young men to entice them to come and play for BYU athletics. And so I actually can respect where BYU is going about it. Yes, they may not have made this splashy addition already that you would have liked to have seen them add, and I get all that. But also at the same time, I understand that BYU wants to make sure they find the right fit, because this is a program I think learned a hard lesson a couple of seasons ago when they went hard in the portal and it didn't yield what they looked for. BYU is going to bet more on continuity and more about development, more importantly, than they are going to be on that, quote, quick fix that comes via the transfer portal. Yes, there are guys BYU needs to add. I already alluded to 3 of them who I think would be very welcome additions for BYU. I also look at a guy like Isaac Wilson. If he's interested in playing for the BYU football program, BYU would do well to bring him in. As I understand it, based on what I've heard from people, is that BYU and Wilson, speaking of Isaac and his family, have been communicating back and forth. How much interest there is on either side, that part I don't know at this juncture. But I think there are a nice group of athletes that are in the portal right now, and there might be more to come, obviously, after bowl games and the like wrap up, that BYU can go out and find themselves, I think, a nice handful of additions if they can win the recruiting battles that are obviously playing out here. And those guys can be impact players for BYU. I think Coug Connect, I think you said that they had a meeting with Andrew Gentry yesterday. Andrew Gentry is such an intriguing prospect because he spurned BYU out of high school. He spurned them after his mission. So is now the 3rd time the charm going to bring him into BYU? There's some thought that if he comes to BYU next year, he's probably penciled in as one of your starting tackles. That's an incredible thing to consider. A guy who has only started all but 2 games during his run at Michigan to this point, but those were 2 games this past season, and he suffered a season-ending injury. So there is intrigue on each one of these young men. Are they looking for a bigger opportunity? Are they looking for something different? The Holtzclaw kid out of Washington, he's got to be looking at BYU potentially and saying, hey, you know what? I saw what a guy like Tyler Batty did. I saw what a guy like Isaiah Banya did. Why can't I be that next guy? That's the kind of give and take you look at, because BYU has a lot of young defensive ends already in their program. And the thing is, are you going to bet on those guys with their continuity and understanding more of the defense for BYU and let them kind of take the reins? Or are you going to look, like I said, at a Holtzclaw or a K.O. Akana and say, hey, that's the guy we need to bring in just to bolster the ranks because they already have production potentially at the Power 4 level. So it's a really, really fine line and a really kind of narrow path that BYU has to walk when it comes to their recruiting and, more importantly, when it comes to the transfer portal. But I really do think that BYU and their philosophy of we're going to bet more on continuity, more on our development of getting guys in the program and letting them develop over 2 and 3 years versus, like I said, that quick fix that comes maybe a 1 or a 2 year transfer that comes in is looking essentially for a paycheck. It's a mercenary sport now, and that's tough to stomach, I think, for a number of you out there, but it's a really, really interesting dynamic that's at play here across college football, and even more so when it comes to BYU football and Kalani Sitake's efforts to upgrade his talent. Now, there's one unique element here. I talked about the fact that BYU wants to be a program that's built on development. Well, there's one hard truth about what's going on with BYU football that, man, I'm getting a really bad feeling about it. I don't think it's necessarily BYU's fault. It's really nobody's fault other than the NCAA's. And we'll talk about a really hard truth that's being learned right now when it comes to recruiting. And we'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys when it comes to your sports betting needs. The more important part is you can have some fun and tackle all the NFL action in the stretch run here with our friends at FanDuel. They are America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app, gives you everything to place your live bets on the NFL all in one place. And the best part is when you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, your live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. That's as simple as that. Visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started once again with $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's FanDuel.com to get started today. Once again, $150 in bonus bets, courtesy of FanDuel if your first $5 bet hits. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, as they are an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. All right, a number of you know that I work a lot with prep sports during the football season, in addition to all my responsibilities with college football. I've had some conversations of late with young men who are obviously looking to play at the next level, because I just want to get a feel for how things are going out there. And these are young men who, they're not necessarily the top tier athletes. I'm not going to say that they're 4- and 5-star prospects, but they are good 3-star prospects across the board. I feel like maybe some of them a little lower than that, but I can say to a man, based on the conversations I had with these young men over the past week and change, there is very little action on the high school front right now because there's such a feeding frenzy when it comes to the transfer portal. BYU's not immune to this, because BYU understands, and I think that they're doing the right thing by looking at all options in the transfer portal, exhausting all of those options, and then reverting back to what they have been doing, whether that's scouting the junior college ranks or, more importantly, the high school ranks. But the tough part is there's a lot of high school talent out there that is essentially left sitting on their hands, just waiting for the opportunity to find their next home when it comes to playing college football. And the fact that they have to wait, and it may wait until the new year, because it's really, the transfer portal isn't closed until December 28th. And even beyond that, you'll have to enter the portal by December 28th. And then you can still obviously come out of the portal at any point and commit to the program you're looking to play for. And it is going to lead to a period where young men who are looking, like I said, for a chance to play at the next level are now left kind of waiting in limbo. And the tough part is all of them essentially are looking at all of the feeding going on, the feeding frenzy. Like I said, it's the proverbial sharks out there having that feeding frenzy and looking at and saying, okay, where am I going to be able to land? Where is my opportunity going to come from? Are you going to have to go maybe the D2 route or the FCS route versus going the FBS route? Speaking of Division I AA or 1A, for those of you who like to use the old jargon when it comes to the NCAA classifications. It's a really interesting time to watch recruiting playing out, because there's obviously all that work that goes on during the spring, the summer, and obviously during the fall with high school talent and trying to get young men on official visits, getting them out to games, unofficial visits, and get as many of them committed as possible. But then it feels like, and I'm not saying that BYU is the only one, because trust me, the conversations I had with some of these young men, some of them don't even have any interest in BYU. But the programs across the board right now essentially have paused, as I understand it, all recruiting conversations with high school talent, and all eyes are right now sitting on the transfer portal. It is a really, really tough pill to swallow if you're kind of stuck in that limbo right now. And really, the problem with it all is the fact that the NCAA has created this just absolutely insane December. If you are a college football coach or a staff member who's working with a Division I football program, good luck trying to celebrate the holidays, because it just doesn't happen. I just saw it's just crazy to watch how this dynamic is playing out in real time, because coaches are having to pass on family opportunities, whether it's parties, life-changing events, all kinds of different stuff, in the name of being available to go out and recruit and find new blood for these college football programs. The NCAA has to find a better way, but I'm also not holding my breath that the NCAA will ever find an adequate response for this. When we have a program like Marshall, who's got a very strong tradition, made it to a bowl game, was excited to go to the Independence Bowl and to play Army in that game, and then their head coach leaves, Charles Huff, to take the job at Southern Miss, and they lose, I think it was 25, if not more, players to the portal. Now it's forced Marshall to say, hey, we can't play in that bowl game. And good job on Louisiana Tech being ready to step up in that circumstance. Obviously, they're a hometown team, in essence, playing in Ruston. They're not that far away from the Independence Bowl. But the bigger point to be made here is you essentially forced a program that had a pretty strong year into having to renege on an opportunity to play in a bowl game. There are upwards of 24 young men who are now in limbo. I'm sure some of them will follow their former head coach to Southern Miss. But the bigger point to be made is you have caused this problem, speaking from the NCAA perspective, because you guys refuse to essentially try and balance this schedule a little bit. You have created now championship week, which, by the way, the same week championship week is going on with regards to conference championships. You have all the portal opening and a feeding frenzy that begins right then, and then it continues on for the next few weeks. And oh, by the way, there's an early signing period going on. It's just, I backed that up. Excuse me. The early signing period is the week of championship week. So those high school talent, like I said, that you spent months of recruiting. So let's back up on this. It was December 4th. That opens up for the 3-day window going into the weekend. Then the transfer portal opened on December 9th, so a week ago. And it's just been all eyes on the transfer portal. Meanwhile, there's bowl games coming up. We already had a bowl game this past weekend. As I said, Marshall had to pull out of a bowl game that they were probably very happy to have accepted that bowl bid, but now they're being forced out of it because of the portal defections and their head coach leaving the program. I don't know that I have a perfect answer for it, but there's got to be a way for the NCAA to balance this out a little bit, to not have all these things layer on top of one another and essentially say, hey, sorry, we can't do anything about that. Charlie Baker and the NCAA out there want to act all like, hey, we're doing the best we can. No, you're not. You're hurting a lot of people out there. Like I said, you're hurting the family lives of coaches, administrators, all the people involved with the football program. You're hurting high school talent, kind of the next crop of talent coming up. You've left them in limbo because all these programs are all after the portal all the time for the next week or so. And then, oh, by the way, until January, that's when it'll pick up back on the high school front. And who knows if there's enough roster spots at that point for the high school talent to glom on with the program because, oh, by the way, you also cut down on the roster spots next year. Good job, NCAA. High five for you guys. Hope you guys are having a fantastic holiday season. I just look at this and it's not good enough. The NCAA for years has crowed about how they want to be this magnanimous, overarching program or not program, an organization or association that is going to help out its member institutions. Meanwhile, all they've done is hamstrung, handcuff, and essentially force their programs to make do with half-baked ideas. And then they're, oh, hey, we got to respond to this. Remember, when NIL was introduced, there were literally no guardrails placed on it from the get-go. They said, hey, have at it, pay your players. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, wait, hold on, this could cause problems. Yeah, it could cause problems, and it is causing problems. And then all of a sudden, they have antitrust case. They're trying to obviously make sure that their coffers stay stuffed. They've settled all those. And meanwhile, they are going to now force universities, if they want to play ball at the highest level, you've got to be able to revenue share of upwards of $20 million with no real plans outside of saying, hey, you can revenue share up to $20 million. And oh, by the way, also your football programs, which are your money makers, you're going to have to take your 123-man rosters and cut those down to 105 players. And, oh, by the way, over time, you also can expand those out to full ride scholarships, which is, multi-million-dollar investment to add probably 20 more scholarships in time. There's no good answer here for the NCAA. There's no good answer that anybody, I think, has at this juncture, but there's got to be a better way here. And I understand you have to deal with regards to guys getting enrolled in the university when it comes to the new year. I get all that, but this is a really, really big mess. And right now, I don't think anybody is winning in the long run with how things are kind of stacked upon each other in the month of December right now with college sports, because it's hurting bowl season. It's obviously hurting interest from the lay fan. I think a number of you out there will say that your fandom, your interest in college football has been hampered by all the changes that have happened, whether it's the money coming into the sport or sports, I should say. But I really do look at this, and there needs to be a better way forward. And I'm gonna have to think about it from my perspective. What do I want to see ultimately transpire? Would I like to see the portal open and close at a different time? Should it open after the bowl games play out? Should it be after the college football playoff That goes into the it's actually late January 20th, I think this year. A Monday night is when the national championship will be played. So in theory, the athletes from those universities playing that national championship, they could already be a week, 3 weeks into the upcoming semester by the time that they, quote unquote, could enter the portal at that point. There's no real good answer. And I really feel for the athletes as they try and find what's next for them. Because like I said, it's hurting high school athletes. It's hurting junior college athletes. I know the junior college have been diminished a little bit, but it's just overall, it's having a net negative impact, I think, on all things college football. And once again, I don't know if there's a ready-made answer to solve the problems outside of putting that genie back in the bottle or putting the toothpaste back in the tube, but we all know that's not going to happen. So it's a really, really weird time to be covering college sports because there's a lot of problems, not a lot of answers to figure out those ills as well. All right. Enough on the football front. What is it going to take for BYU basketball to really gear up and get ready as they have just one game over the next 2 weeks, roughly, leading up to Big 12 play? We'll dig into that. Some football thoughts coming up. Not football thoughts, basketball thoughts coming up next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends, a new friend over at the College Football Playoffs. You heard that right. It's that time of the year. The College Football Playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, my friends, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. Of course, TNT Sports coverage of the College Football Playoff begins December 21st, not that far away. Starting with the first College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 9 a.m. Mountain Time for those of you here along the Wasatch Front, leading into their first matchup, the SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 2 o'clock Mountain Time. Don't miss a moment of that action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. All right. So BYU basketball got a big win. Okay, big's probably a wrong term, but a solid win over Wyoming over the weekend. Now, up at the Delta Center, I thought the crowd filled in nicely. They announced 11,000 people were there. I really appreciate all of the fans that make that trek north because I know it can be a little bit of out of the way because to make the trek 40 miles north to the Delta Center, I think it's a really good opportunity for BYU to play on an NBA court because that's obviously something that all these young men aspire to do. But more importantly, watching that game play out from BYU's perspective against the Wyoming Cowboys, I thought the BYU showed more of a defensive backbone. And something I have been looking for, if you've been listening to this podcast since the season began, is I want to see BYU buckle down defensively. And something that Kevin Young highlighted in his postgame comments, saying that he liked the fact that they made a renewed effort and commitment to playing defense. And I know that Wyoming's not necessarily a world beater. They're 5-5 on the year. So they're not necessarily the top tier talent that you want. But when you hold any opponent under 50 points, I will give you a gold star for your effort on defense. So that goes to the BYU basketball program. The other thing I'm struggling with BYU basketball right now is when Jaeger Demon's not playing for BYU, the interest factor, I think, falls off significantly. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's not in the media, but we were going back and forth on this game against Wyoming, and he said, man, I have so much less desire to watch BYU when Jaeger Demon's not playing. And I tried to kind of counter saying, well, why aren't you watching a guy like Cannon Catchings or Mihailo Bošković, who are guys who have NBA aspirations? Or why aren't you watching to see what Dallin Hall's doing or Richie Saunders? By the way, big ups to Richie Saunders. He said that he had a concussion and a busted up lip was the term he used on Instagram. They said it was a lacerated lip when they told us in the media on Saturday night. So hopefully he will be back and able to play as soon as BYU can get him cleared. Now, I would expect that you probably hold him out against Florida A&M on Friday because I don't think FAMU is necessarily the world beater that you want to bring him back against, but you got to get him ready for ASU. And I think the same thing with Jaeger Demon right now is that any injuries guys have at this point, I know that only one game over 2 weeks roughly is a bad thing for rust to set in for the BYU basketball program. But in this circumstance, with some of your top tier talent, speaking mainly of Jaeger Demon, as well as Richie Saunders being dinged up right now, maybe a blessing in disguise to have this extra time off for BYU. Obviously, you can practice, keep guys engaged, get the shots up, have some scrimmages and the like in the lead up to Big 12 play kicking off. But I also think this is an important time for BYU. Fingers crossed that they go into Arizona State in the Big 12 season as healthy as they possibly can be at this point. I'm looking forward to a big Big 12 season. I know that's kind of a pejorative there to use that term, but I really do like the way things are shaping up for BYU. Because if the defense, what they have shown the last few games on defense is real, BYU is going to be a tough out. Because you can win games with your offense every so often, but more importantly, you're going to win more games playing strong defense. And that's obviously going to take a lot of effort from BYU players to play strong defense, because it takes effort to play high-level defense, especially against some of the lineups and the talent that BYU will face in the Big 12 Conference. But the renewed emphasis on defense and kind of what I saw from guys out there playing against Wyoming and some of the games before that, I also look at the Fresno State game, etc. I'm seeing BYU players dig in and say, you know what? We got to make hay on the defensive side of the basketball. I will give a major shout out to Mawit Mag, because he has shown a lot in that one game against Wyoming as to why he should be considered to get extra time on the court for BYU. Kevin Young said it himself in post-game availability, saying that he has had a really, really tough circumstance, speaking of Mag, trying to find an opportunity to play with this BYU basketball program. And Kevin said he hasn't made it easy on him because there just simply hasn't been a lot of minutes to dole out to him. But when Richie Saunders gets knocked out in the first few minutes of that game against Wyoming, well, Mag came in and was a revelation. Played very, very strong defense, showed why BYU was so high on him in the transfer portal, because he's a defensive specialist. And if his defensive skill combined with the fact that he shot 3 of 4 from 3, if he can be that 3-and-D specialist for BYU this Big 12 season, that's going to be a big thing for BYU. You've got to be able to lock up opposing teams' best wing players. And if a guy like Mawit Mag can be that guy for BYU, great. That's awesome. The other thing you have to figure out is, how do you find time for him on the court, and who loses time as a result of that? That's the other thing you got to balance here, is what guys are going to be in that rotation, which guys are going to be maybe in the rotation if injuries crop up and the like. But you got to cut it down a little bit. You can't play a 10, 11-man, 12-man rotation every single game in Big 12 play, at least from my vantage point. I don't think Kevin Young has plans to do that either. Now, he hasn't necessarily put that out there. Maybe he's going to surprise all of us, and he's going to play as many guys as he feels necessary. And there might be nights he has to do that, but I think the bigger thing is success is bred in college basketball when you get a nice core rotation of usually 6 to 7 to 8 guys, and they are the guys that you ride every night because they get some cohesiveness, they get some continuity playing together, they start to understand where each other are going to be on the court, they start to be able to speak the same language, to use that example. And I think it's going to be important for BYU basketball to settle in on that core group. And there are going to be guys who are going to miss time and maybe be sitting on the bench. They're going to be very unhappy about that as a result. But at this point, what's it all about? It's about results. It's about winning basketball games. And BYU knows what they're up against when it comes in the Big 12. Maybe Kevin Young doesn't necessarily know because he's never played a Big 12 slate, but guys like Dallin Hall, Fousseyni Traore, Richie Saunders, they have been through the battles that BYU went through a year ago, and they know what's coming, and they know what they're going to be facing every single game when it comes to Big 12 play. And I hope that they can impart to their younger teammates. I'm speaking of guys like Jaeger Demon, Cannon Catchings, Mihailo Bošković, Mawit Mag. I think all of them get a sense of, okay, this is when it gets real. Obviously, you have one final tune-up game against Florida A&M on Friday night, and I'm looking forward to that. But then it's real. It's time to go. You have ASU, then you have Houston right out of the chute. Like, it does not get any easier from here for BYU basketball. But at the same time, it's the best time of the year to watch, and we'll see how they go about it. Defense is going to be where BYU has their most success this year. The offense, I'm not so concerned about. I am concerned about the effort and the intensity on defense. If they can bring it, what they have showed the past 2 games in particular against Fresno State and more importantly against Wyoming, if that's real and BYU can play that type of a defense every single night when they're on the court in Big 12 play, we're looking at a pretty fun season for BYU. But if it was a mirage, if it was just a one-game wonder, well, then it can be a very long Big 12 slate all at the same time. All right, so that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Cougars. A big thank you, as always, for your guys' support of the podcast. It's the holiday season. You may be out at a family party here or there. You may just be at a party in general. You got fellow Cougar fans you're around. Tell them about the podcast. Word of mouth is absolutely critical for how we build this audience here on Locked On Cougars. So anything you guys can do to help spread the word and share it with your family and friends is much appreciated. But as always, thank you for your support of the podcast. Thank you so much for being a part of it. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, once again, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.